Okay, here we go. So, decided that it would be a good idea to do um, this week on Sefirat HaOmer in law and in custom, and then we will continue and um, go into to Sefirat Parsha Shavua. Okay, here we go. So, the idea of Sefirat HaOmer begins with um, 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 a verse in the book of Vayikra, which is actually in this coming week's parsha. We read it on every one of the holidays, and it is simply this: Usfartem lachem macharat Shabbat miyom aviachem et omer hatnufa. So you shall count. Usfartem lachem means, and you should count for yourself from the day after the Shabbat, which does not mean the day after the Saturday. It means the day after the first day of Pesach. Miyom aviachem et omer hatnufa, when you bring the omer hatnufa, the omer offering. So we really have to stop at this point and just discuss for a moment what omer really means. So the omer is an offering that is brought of the new barley crop. Most people don't take up gorgeous pictures of barley, so I had to just stop with a gorgeous picture of wheat being cut by a sickle. But barley is the more primitive of the two grains, and barley is used in only two offerings in all of the temple service. It is used in what happens to be the offering of the sota, the ritual of the sota. The woman who is accused of being adulterous, she has to bring something out of omer, out of barley, and it is also used in this particular offering. This is going to be somewhat important in terms of understanding what the Omer is all about, sort of on a conceptual level. But I believe it was Dr. Johnson who, when defining oats, said it's what, excuse me, the people eat in Scotland and the horses eat in England. So it is, the rabbis understood that barley is animal food. And it is a much coarser grain, and I guess cholent hadn't yet been invented, and so the barley was something that was just not as desirable as wheat, but it ripens earlier in the season, and so the very first grain that comes to bloom is going to be barley, and so they would go out to the fields nearest to Jerusalem, and they would reap barley, and they would take that barley, and they would bring it into they would bring it into the temple, and there was a special offering, a sort of a wave offering. They would sort of appreciate this. The idea behind this is that this is the very first crop that could become available, and you're going to celebrate it, and you're going to say thank you to Hashem for the new crop. And we're going to learn a little bit more about that. But that's what the Omer is. So there's this day where you bring this Omer sacrifice. Happens to be the day after the Seder. So it's going to be the 16th of Nisan. Okay, so you bring the Omer HaTnufa, this wave offering, and then it says, Sheva Shabbatot Miot Tiana. So that refers back to the beginning of the sentence. The beginning of the sentence is Usvartem, and you shall count over here. And that's going to relate directly to Sheva Shabbatot Tmimot. 7 complete weeks are you going to count. Ad, until Mimacharat HaShabbat HaShavit, until the end of the 7th week, Tisperu Chamishim Yom, you shall count 50 days, Vikraftem Mincha Chadasha Ladonai, and you shall bring a new meal offering to God. So we're going to have to figure out what that new meal offering is, but the count of the Omer is fundamentally a count, excuse me, between this first barley crop and this new grain offering. Now, this all relates to something which you didn't think you were getting into today, which is the prohibition of something which is called chadash. So chadash is new wheat. And so wheat that has not taken root before the 16th of Nisan is technically not kosher, and you cannot eat it until the following 16th of Nisan. No wheat crop can be touched until it's had its day of the Omer. Now, originally, it was no wheat crop could be touched until the Omer sacrifice itself was given. Excuse me.
How about a glass of water, Rabbi?
Yeah. Okay. Until until the new crop was permitted by this Omer sacrifice. That doesn't happen anymore. So the rabbis say, okay, fine, we're going to take the date. That would be the 16th of Nisan. So sometimes you will see a um, uh, a kosher product that has written upon it the word Yashan. Yashan is the opposite of Chadash. Chadash means new. Yashan means old. And so the 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 kosher designation is that if you are a person who is very careful about Chadash, you can rest assured that this is kosher enough for you. Now, what do we have here? What we have here is an issue that everybody agrees is a problem in Israel. But in Israel, they cycle their grains, they store the grains from one year, they delay it to the next year, so that the products that come to market are always of the last year's grain product. So the problem does not really materialize in the Israeli market. In the days of Jimmy Carter, this was also not a problem because the government was buying up all sorts of farm products and they were overlaying them for a long time. And so the things that got to market, when you bought Pillsbury flour in in January, that was at least 18 months old. But at a certain point, the policies of the Carter government stopped being in effect, and wheat went directly to market. Now, in the diaspora where we live, most people rely on the idea that if it is a doubt whether or not this is new wheat in the diaspora, you don't have to worry. This itself is an issue of debate, which is why some people out here, you know, in especially in the more religiously rigorous communities, they are very careful about this. So the picture I have over here on the left is the picture of somebody stocking their garage with, I think I put into the AI shredded wheat. So the idea is, somebody who eats shredded wheat for breakfast all the time. So this time of year, you don't have to worry because we are 25 days since into the Omer. No shredded wheat was made from this New Year's crop of wheat. Just is impossible to be in the market. So what that means is now you're fine. But when you get into August, maybe everything is, you don't know. So then what you do is you go get Costco quantities of shredded wheat and you stock it in your garage and hopefully you finish it all by Pesach. That's the idea if you are very particular about Chadash. And here, this is the verse that tells you why this is prohibited. It says, V'lechem v'kali v'karmel. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. V'lechem v'kali v'karmel. So you shall not eat bread, not roasted kernels. Lo tochlo ad etzem hayom. Until that very day. Ad aviachem et korban alechem. Until you bring the this offering to God. It is an everlasting law for all of your generations. So that's the verse. This is not really related to the Omer, but it is obviously very related to the ceremony of bringing the Omer. Yes, Annie.
Well, Rabbi, since we don't have Bet HaMikdash and we're not even living we're not even living in Israel at the moment, all this pertains only to Israel if there's Beit HaMikdash, correct?
No, so that's the whole thing. If you knew it was Chadash in Chutz La'aretz, everyone would agree that you can't eat it.
How would you know if it's Chadash or not Chadash? Somebody else is growing it.
Um, so that's why it's Safek Chadash. There are ways to know. There are ways to track these things.
We're so far away from the fields.
Okay, but there are ways to know, even if you're far away from the fields. Okay, Tov. Oops, hold on. Okay, now, what is the Omer span? What is what we're talking about? So it's very important to see this. Okay, this block in red is the first Seder. I think this actually, I just got the computer to give me a calendar grid, so I put it on Wednesday because I think that was the night of the first Seder, and so that's when we did. My father was a wandering Aramean, and actually this block here, Omer, I put it on Thursday, but that's really halachic Thursday because the Omer would be that night. So really, this maybe goes over to Friday, okay, in official terms, and then we count 7 weeks. Now, the 7 weeks of this Omer, you'll see why my father was a wandering Aramean. That is one of the central texts of the Seder, right? That is one of the things that we interpret. If you recall your Seder, it's that section where we say, "Come and learn what Laban the Aramean tried to do." Right? Laban tried to uproot the whole thing, and Pharaoh only decreed against the males. So this is the text that the Mishnah says you're supposed to interpret. My father was an Aramean. There are two ways to translate it. The Haggadah actually says an Aramean tried to destroy my father, but I'm too fixated on my father was a wandering Aramean. I always translate it that way. Don't ask me why. I just think it's a better translation. So that's the text we read at the beginning of the Seder. That's an important thing to remember. Then we bring the Omer and we count 7 weeks. And the purpose of this count, as explicitly stated in the verses, is to get us to this next temple ritual, which is the ritual of the 2 loaves. So the 2 loaves are important because what are the 2 loaves made out of? They are not made out of barley. They're made out of wheat. So this movement we go from the Omer to the 2 loaves is a movement we go from animal food to people food, right? Which is why I guess I'm in love with the whole, my father was a wandering Aramean, because at this point in time when we were wandering, shepherds are wanderers, right? They're always moving the herds around. That's sort of the, if you will, the origin of the Jewish people. Our origin is this sort of shepherding phase, right? When the when the animals are eating the barley. But ultimately, we have this transition that brings us to this thing which is called the 2 loaves. And this is going to open up a season of the year which is called the first fruits, the time of the first fruits. After the 2 loaves are brought, then you bring your first fruits. And if you recall, the mitzvah of the first fruits is kind of unique. What you do with the first fruits is you take, let's say, grapes, could be figs, could be any of the fruits of Israel. You discover that you have a tree, and it has fruits that are available, and you're going to tie a ribbon around them. You're going to identify them as first fruits. There's no specific amount which is determined, and you're going to take those first fruits up to Jerusalem. And those first fruits are a way of celebrating the fact that you are now an owner of property. You only bring those if you own a property, and I think the minimum amount of property you need to own is 3 trees. And so it's a way of saying, I am celebrating the fact that God gave me a land. And you take those up to Jerusalem and you give them to the the Kohen. And when you give them to the Kohen, you're going to make a declaration that starts with exactly those words, which I believe I have on the next slide, except one thing. I just got to erase my little scrawl here. And now we go to the next slide. Okay. And this is the first fruits declaration. You've taken that basket of fruits and you say, V'anita v'armata lifnei Hashem Elokecha, and this is what you will declare before the Lord your God. Arami oved avi. So this is what I translated as, oops, I did not want to do that. This is what I translated as these words right here, or what I translated as my father was they say fugitive Aramean. But to be fair, the Haggadah translates them differently. The Haggadah translated that my father, an Aramean, tried to destroy my father. That's how the Haggadah translated. So either translation probably has some virtue to it, but this particular statement is what you're bringing this basket of fruit and you're saying this to the Kohen, and then you're going to go forward, and this will hopefully sound even more familiar. Vayered Mitzrayim, and he went down to Egypt. Vayagar Sham b'mtei and he dwelt there few in number. V'yisham lagoy gadol, and he became a great nation there. Atzum v'rav, a mighty or great and populous nation. This is the beginning of the the center of the Magid section of our Haggadah, but it is also this declaration about my first fruits. And what I love about the two translations of Aramei Avei Davi is they talk about both vulnerability, the lack of citizenship, wandering, the abuse that took place over that entire period. But now you're celebrating the opposite of all of those things. And so this is a declaration that you make on the one hand in the Seder at the beginning of the Omer period, and on the other hand as the first fruit ceremony at the end of the Omer period.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Now, hold on. Let me just manage some. All right. If you wish to speak, please unmute yourself and have at it. Okay. Now, actually, before I get to this part of the discussion, I want to get us back here. One of the things I think it's just very important to understand about the Omer is the count of the Omer anyway is a count between two different temple rituals. One is the Omer ritual, which would take place on this would be the 16th of, actually, this isn't really the right day. This would be the right day, the 16th of Nisan. So it would take place on this day, 16 Nisan, and it would last, and the two loaves would be on day 6th of Sivan, right? Which would be 50 days thereafter. You count 49, and this is the 50th day. So obviously it's not 1 month. I'm aware of that, but I couldn't put two onto one slide. And this statement, my father was a wandering Aramean, is said in both of these rituals. So you have two rituals with this idea. And I think part of what this celebrates is this movement from wandering. The Exodus is still a moment of wandering to a moment of being settled, which is the moment of being in the land of Israel. There's a lot more that could be said about that, but that's maybe not something I have time for. So, but again, I just want to emphasize that the 7 weeks was originally a temple ritual. It was meant to establish 2 days on the temple calendar, and nowadays it establishes the holiday of Shavuot, but it also has a number of other sort of meanings that are layered over it. One of those meanings is something which has come to be a bit of a negative aspect. And what negative aspect is that? So this is from the Shulchan Aruch, Orach Chaim, section 493. He tells us, it is customary not to get married between Pesach and Shavuot until Lag BaOmer, because during that time the students of Rabbi Akiva died. So the Talmud tells us that there's a story about the students of Rabbi Akiva that between Pesach and Atzeret, 24,000 or 12,000 pairs of students passed away. Now, this is obviously a very significant thing. The Talmud assumes that the problem was some kind of pandemic. That's how it's described in the Talmud. There are some who say that that this is the Talmud had to be circumspect, and it couldn't have written what was really going on. When do 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva die? Well, they died of acute heavy metal poisoning. And that was during the hands of the Romans, because Rabbi Akiva was a big proponent of Bar Kokhba, and Bar Kokhba, and the way in which the Romans dealt with the Bar Kokhba was they knew that the Bar Kokhba would have to have been supported by Jewish villages. So they uprooted 900 Jewish villages, and the carnage was absolutely unbelievable. It was like an extermination of Jews. And so these were all followers of Rabbi Akiva. That's one explanation. I think there are some problems with that. There's some scholars who dispute that that's the way it was. Well, it doesn't really matter. Jewish tradition has this assumption that this is part of the tragedies that happened during this period of time, which we memorialize. And so what do we not do? We don't get married during this period of time. And maybe there are different ways to break up these 33 days. And so, and even for Nisuin, just a little, maybe a little explanation of some of the language here. So, however, to do erusin, this word, that is actual marriage. Kiddushin is just really engagement. So there is some debate about Kiddushin is a little bit more legalistic. So there are different understandings. But one of the things which is certainly generally understood is you are allowed to get engaged during this period. One of the reasons you're allowed to get engaged during this period is you don't want someone to steal your prize. And so we wouldn't let a custom like that get in the way. But generally speaking, the Ashkenazic custom is not to get married during the period of the Omer. I think Sephardim is maybe even more stringent. Only on the 33rd day of the Omer do you get married. And so the first thing we're learning is that marriage is prohibited during this period as an observance of the mourning for the students of Rabbi Akiva. Now, there is more to say on the subject, and that is the Ramah, who is the Ashkenazic voice, says, however, from Lag BaOmer onwards, all this is permitted. So he cites two other earlier authorities that said German custom was that once Lag BaOmer hits, we are no longer mourning, and you can get married at that point. So that is perhaps the custom that most people are aware of. You start during Pesach. There are no marriages from Pesach to Lag BaOmer. What is interesting is the Rambam doesn't record this prohibition of marriage at all during the Omer. Just doesn't appear in the Rambam. It appears in the Tur, a code, and after the Tur, it appears in the Beit Yosef. There is a theory that goes a little bit differently, which is that this is really this mourning was adopted more by early Ashkenazic sources, which is why the Tur his father was a refugee from the Germanic lands. And so the persecution of Germanic lands would have been a very fresh thing in his family. So one of the first sources where we see this start to be codified in Jewish law comes from a rabbinic family that hails from Germany. And Germany had been very, very traumatized by the Crusades. The First Crusade in particular, especially in the towns of Mainz and Worms, they came in and they piled the bodies up naked. It was a very, very bloody affair. And this was very, very violent, and it created a lot of need for memorialization. It is possible. It's hard to prove this because there's just not a lot of sources on this. But it could be that this was something that was adopted by early Ashkenazic Jews because of the Crusades, but they liked the confluence with what was happening with Rabbi Akiva. And so it became a dual period of mourning for both the tragedies of the Crusades and the students of Rabbi Akiva. And so we are given this period of time. Now, this is a period of time that is rife with a lot of debate over what really one should or should not do. These are the things that are officially prohibited during the Omer. This is what's written in the Shulchan Aruch. Haircuts. So haircuts are prohibited during this period from Pesach to Lag BaOmer. But my teacher, Rabbi Aaron Lichtenstein, had a very interesting approach. He said, look, it is true, you're not supposed to cut your hair during the Omer. However, um, Shabbat has some laws associated. One of the laws of Shabbat is you're supposed to groom yourself for Shabbat. And if you're not someone who grows out a long beard and you shave on a regular basis, so then the custom is that you shouldn't shave. But the halacha, the din, the actual law is you should look good for Shabbos. So where does the custom get up and say, oh, you should ignore Shabbos? Let me put it differently. Let's just say the custom in the Omer was you should wear sackcloth, right? So would we wear sackcloth on Shabbos? Well, you're not allowed to do public displays of mourning on Shabbos. So you're supposed to change your clothes. So there, Shabbos we wouldn't allow such a thing. So as a result, Rabbi Lichtenstein essentially saying is, look, the issue of shaving is obviously something which can't happen on Shabbos. Once it gets to Shabbos, you're not going to have a choice on that. You can't shave. But beforehand, this part of the preparation for Shabbos should trump a relatively recent custom to not shave during the Omer. Weddings, as we saw, are explicitly forbidden. Music is interesting. Music, if you look at the if you look at the Shulchan Aruch will tell you weddings, but it does not say anything about music. In the code of Jewish law, it does not say, oh, you can't listen to music. Now, this could be very much a product of how easy or hard it was to listen to music. If in the 15th century or 16th century, you wanted to listen to music, you would have to go find a couple of things that may not have been so plentiful. You would first of all need to find a luthier, someone who could make instruments, and you would also need to find someone who could play those said instruments, and you would have to find out when they're playing. And so these things could be very complicated. It wasn't like, everybody had an iPod, right? But nowadays, music is everywhere. It's ubiquitous. It's so easy. When I was a kid, you either needed to find a radio or you need to go buy a record. And records weren't always cheap. Now, my kids listen to music with so much more ease, right? There's so many different ways you can listen to music for a fraction of what it used to cost. And so music is just more ubiquitous. And so we have to deal with music more than they do. There's a bit of debate about music. What music usually means in terms of the Omer is that people say, well, look, weddings create joy through music. And part of what's prohibited about the wedding is the music. And music is part of the prohibitions of the proper mourning period. So people extend it here as well. And so most authorities, almost all authorities, prohibit music during this period of time. Even if it's not a wedding, they basically say it's an extension of the prohibition of a wedding. What is not on this list is buying new clothing. That is something which belongs more to the 3 weeks than it does to this time in year. So if you need to buy a new suit, something like that, that's not really prohibited during the Omer period. Okay.